Growth and Natural Resources Committee meeting. I'm calling this meeting to order. We have two items today, wild and exotic animals and the omnibus text change program. I am going to switch the order of the items. So we're going to start first with wild and exotic animals. I think our Madam Attorney has an update for us and we'll go from there. Robin, you're muted.
Thank you. Yes, I was having a little problem with my layout. I was only seeing you, but I think I've resolved that now. Okay, just a quick recap. At the November 23rd GNR meeting, the committee continued its discussions about a proposed wild and dangerous animal ordinance. At that time, we had presented a chart, and if Tansy, the deputy city manager, could pull that up, that would be great. Anyway, setting forth potential options for regulating this area. There we go. And you may remember that there are 4 potential options that we discussed, and I won't go over them in details, but basically one would be to ban wild, endangered, or dangerous wild animals with no grandfathering, meaning that everyone who had them would have to get rid of them pretty quickly. The second would be to ban dangerous wild animals, basically going forward, but allowing people who already have them to keep them subject to a registration program that we had outlined and specifically. The third option would be to allow people to have wild and dangerous animals, but to have the same registration program, which involves a fee and providing the city with some information. And the last one would be to not have any ordinance at all and to continue operating under the state rules as we have done in the past. Now, after we went through those options. Councilmember Fort had asked whether non-human primates included small pet monkeys, and we had indicated that it did. And so she asked for some information from some experts to be brought back today. There is in the backup for the agenda some information that has been provided regarding non-human primates, and that's a part of the agenda backup as well as, and that's from the North American Primate Sanctuary Alliance. And we've got some public comment people too, and I don't know if anybody's going to speak to that. But basically, that's how we left it. And I think now I can maybe, I don't know if the chair wants to talk about anything else. I do know there's some people signed up to speak. I did want to say that you have a couple of options today. You can vote to recommend, vote it out and recommend one of the options. You can vote to vote to out of committee with no recommendation. You can keep it in the committee. And those are basically, you know, what you can do after today. So having said that, I will turn it back to you, Mayor Pro Tem, and we're here if needed to answer questions or provide other information as needed.
Great. Thank you, Madam Attorney. Deputy City Manager, I think we can take down the slides. Thank you. And I'll start. Council members, do you have any questions just about where we are in this process? Councilmember Cox?
It seemed that some of the terms aren't defined very clearly, like, you know, what is a significant venomous snake, for example, or what is considered significant medically.
We actually have looked at that and have a definition prepared. Ms. Hayward, do you have that available to pull it up?
Yeah, I'll pull.
Can we make it any bigger? Oh, there we go. Okay, and Alice worked on this and looked at a number of different sources, and basically this is consistent with what I think some of the experts had said. I look back at the minutes, and it would be a medically significant venomous snake means a venomous or poisonous species where the venom or toxin can cause death or serious injury or illness or injury in humans that may require emergency room care or the immediate care of a physician. And I guess some of our speakers could speak to that if they want to, but that's the one that we came up with and thought covered it to our understanding.
Councilmember Cox, did you have any follow-up questions, or is that good?
Okay, that was about medically significant. There was another term in there as well. I forgot if you could put that slide back up. Or maybe I can get it.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Cox, you wanted to see the definition the chart?
The chart.
The chart? I am happy to share it again.
Okay, medically significant venomous. Okay, okay, thank you. Okay, yeah, that answers my question then. Yes.
Great. Council members have any other questions? We're going to open up public comment next, and then we can have further discussion and debate, but just wanted to see if y'all have any questions first. Councilmember Knight.
Back to Madam Attorney's statement on the, I'm just trying to make sure that everybody can see what the primate group that we talked about, that's in backup so the public can see that of what their comments were. Or we could just tell them shortly what they thought about it. I think they do obviously oppose the keeping of non-human primates as pets. So I just want to make sure the public is aware that this expert group that focuses on these animals does not believe that should happen.
Yeah, Councilmember Knight, there are 3 documents attached to your board docs agenda. The presentations from your prior, there are actually 4 documents, the presentations from your prior 2 meetings, the chart that's been discussed here, and the 4th is a packet of materials that includes a presentation and a couple of fact sheets that are all consolidated as one document that the city attorney referred to.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's
not
the
for
North.
me, it's for making sure the public gets because sometimes people don't have that access. So just making sure they're aware of that.
That's the North American Primate Sanctuary Alliance.
Councilmember Knight, thank you for summing that up. All right, I think we are ready for public comment then. So I will ask for Mr. Chavis's help. I believe we have 8 speakers, and we'll give each of them 3 minutes.
Yes, the first speaker, ma'am, is Elena Bazanos. Ms. Bazanos, you are now unmuted, and you can speak.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. Yes, my name is Elena Bazanos, and I'm a resident of Raleigh in District D. And I strongly support limiting ownership of dangerous wild animals in Raleigh, and I urge you to vote in favor of number 2, banning dangerous wild animals with grandfathering and registration. The private possession of wild species poses unacceptable harm to the community. The average person simply doesn't have the expertise and resources necessary to provide the specialized and costly care that captive wild animals require. So I think that restricting ownership of dangerous wild animals in Raleigh is a common sense proposal that is in the best interest of the public. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next individual is Amanda
Wilmer.
Umar. Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to allow me to speak. I am a resident of Pickwick, the neighborhood where Christopher Gifford lives. I live 5 houses down from him. And the fact that we did not know for 7 months that there was a venomous snake out there that is not native to this country or this continent, it was pretty mind-blowing. It's like living, learning that there's a meth lab right up the street. And I would normally go along with number 2, but it is so late. Mr. Gifford's supervised probation runs out in a few weeks, and he's never stopped. They don't do it in their house anymore since he's on probation, but he's never stopped breeding and selling snakes. He just does it at a friend's house while he's on probation. He's made trips to Miami or Florida to get more reptiles. And I would really like him, I don't think the law worked. It had no teeth. All he did was pay for the cleanup, what it cost and everything. And it was just pure dumb luck that no one got hurt. And had someone, been seriously injured or killed by that snake, I think everybody would take this a whole lot more seriously than, what some have as far as the law. But, as far as the other animal, my thing is just the non-native venomous animal reptiles. Is what I have the biggest problem with. I'd like to see an outright ban on them with no grandfather, no anything. Thank you.
The next individual is Cindy Stone.
Hi. My name is Cindy Stone. I'm also a resident of Pickwick, and I just live right down the street from Christopher Guilford too. And just knowing that that snake was on the loose for 7 or 8 months and nobody was notified, that's unconscionable. We have to protect the citizens of this community from people like Chris Guilford. And everybody else, the other people that have talked previously, I support every single word they said. And that's my stand. I'm just following through, and I like very much what they have already put out there. So that's my piece. Thank you for listening.
The next individual is Jen Davis.
Good afternoon. I'm not in favor of the bans. We all know that. A ban just creates more problem for all of us, especially those of us that have to clean up in the aftermath. I think that a registration process and promoting accountability and responsibility of the ones who have ownership of these animals, I think is the best way to go with this. People are going to keep them regardless of whether there's a law in place or not. But if you make it so that it's responsible and easily obtained for them to be held accountable for it, I think that that would make measures a lot easier on both sides so that we're not shocked when something's in someone's house. We already know that it's there. I think that first responders, law enforcement need to know what's in these homes should an event happen, whether it's a structure fire, a natural disaster, or something like this. I'm happy to help, like I said, in any way on both sides, to provide the education and the knowledge to deal with these situations. But I do believe from experience in dealing with it, a ban is just going to cause more issues.
The next individual is Jim Sliwa.
Yes, my name is Jim Schlieva, and I also live in Pickwick Village, about 400 yards away from the house where the snakes were at. My first comment is, on the last meeting, the mayor pro tem implied that the current laws worked and really didn't support any type of ban. I'm sorry to say I don't believe that's the case. I'm not sure how the city police were able to identify that it was his snake that got away and what the type of snake was. I know the person who took the picture identified the snake. I know that on Facebook, his friends posted, "Oh, it looks like somebody found your snake." I'm not sure if that's how the city law enforcement and other people found out. So registration is mandatory if we're going to allow for non-native venomous snakes, as well as other primates and other wild animals, to be living in people's homes. We live in a metropolitan area. Wildlife that are dangerous are not pets. This escapes, and the escapes of others can hurt people, your family, your friends, your domestic animals. I don't know how you would feel about somebody living next door that has a collection of venomous snakes. Registration is mandatory from my point of view, and limits are required if we're not going to do a total ban. If I look at the fact that these animals escape their professional environments of zoos and aquariums and other places where people who are professionals are managing them and taking care of them. And we expect that residents of a city of Raleigh are going to be better at taking care and keeping these animals and dangerous things secure in their environments. I really doubt that any person who is in the public has the capability in their home to protect better than the zoos and other areas where these professionals are, and these things escape those environments and have killed people from those environments. Thank you.
The next individual is Lindsay Winthrop.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the chance to speak. My name is Lindsay Winthrop, and I am a Wake County resident against the ban on animals deemed as wild and dangerous. I sent a letter to the mayor and all members of the city council in opposition to this ban, and I'm here to highlight some of those points today. My family includes a sweet and loving wolf dog hybrid who is not wild or dangerous. In fact, the federal animal welfare regulations classifies wolf dog hybrids as domesticated animals. Quote, Crosses between wild animal species and domestic animals such as dogs and wolves or buffalo and domestic cattle are considered to be domestic animals." End quote. I'm an active member of the community and recently bought my first home in Raleigh. I specifically chose Raleigh after researching animal ordinances for the purpose of keeping my wolf dog legal and safe. Our wolf dog is well adjusted and social. She shares our home with one other dog and 2 cats, which is a testament to her demeanor. During our walks around the neighborhood and hikes around Raleigh in North Carolina, she enjoys meeting people, both adults and children. She especially loves meeting other dogs. She has had hundreds of interactions with family and pets, all of which have been positive, which also speaks to her demeanor. She is more than a pet. She is our family and knows nothing other than our home. I realize the zebra cobra incident has brought us here today. I would also like to note the person guilty of this incident has already been charged and sentenced under current state law. I believe in the need for responsible pet ownership, but the regulations needed to ensure responsibility and to protect the community are already in place. Under this proposed ban, responsible pet parents will become criminals and will be punished with fines that are excessive and unmanageable. Animals that fall under the proposed ban do not have another place to go, and many would be euthanized if seized. It is appalling to think that pets could be taken and euthanized at any point under this ban. I'm sure many of you own pets you consider to be part of your family. Can you imagine how traumatic it would be for your family to have your pet euthanized? Not because your pet was aggressive, but because an arbitrary new law deemed your pet illegal. This is cruel and inhumane and not in the best interest of the animals or our community. Bans like this one historically do not achieve intended goals, but rather create unintended negative consequences for the community. Again, I understand there is always a need for responsible pet ownership, but the laws for this are already in place. There are many dangers that Raleigh residents are faced with every day, and the animals deemed as wild and dangerous are the least problematic concerns for the safety and well-being of our city. A ban of this degree would upend our lives. We would be forced to sell our house, move, and find new jobs, and all within a short 90-day time frame. Disregarding the residents who have animals that currently legally live in Raleigh would be a failure to the community and the trust we place in you as civil servants. As your constituent, I strongly urge you to vote no on this ban. Thank you.
The next individual is Bill Goss.
Hello, my name is Phil Goss. I am president of the United States Association of Reptile Keepers, or USARC. We are a federal 501c6 nonprofit organization defending the freedoms of responsible reptile and amphibian keepers. And I always highlight the word responsible. I am certainly not here to defend Mr. Gifford today. He is, an outlier in the reptile community. Most people by far are responsible with their animals, and as far as keeping venomous, Mr. Gifford, kind of missed law number 1 with venomous snakes, which is you always have secondary containment for your animals. So even if an animal does happen to get out of a cage, or if there's an unfortunate bite while handling one of the venomous snakes, the snake cannot get out of the room or whatever the secondary containment is for that animal. So again, certainly doesn't represent responsible keepers. And I'm glad that the state law worked in the case of Mr. Gifford. And we always hate to see collective punishment. So what you have here is one person who violated a law that's already in place, and now several other people, an undetermined amount, are going to be punished because of the actions of one person. So just imagine if this was something else, if it was home ownership or dog ownership or driving, you can't punish everyone because of the actions of one bad actor. And, that's unconstitutional in my mind, and I hate to see that go forward. As far as medically significant, I think you had a good definition there. We also supplied a definition that covered the 3 families of snakes and twig snakes and vine snakes that were, an actual list of medically significant snakes. If you want to go that route through a registration or a permitting process, I think that's the way that Raleigh should go on this endeavor. And I would also like to point out your definition of DWA. You're kind of looking at 2 groups of animals here. So the venomous snakes and crocodilians are covered under state law. Your other animals in that list are not. So again, there is already a state law in place for the reptiles that don't pertain to the large cats and primates. So Raleigh should certainly take that into consideration. And the last line of your definition, unless it changed, actually says this definition does not include animals regulated by federal and state laws or regulations. So in one breath, you're actually banning or classifying venomous snakes and crocodilians as DWAs. And then in the next breath, you're actually saying that this law doesn't apply to them because they are regulated under state law. So again, I think reptiles probably need to be looked at a little bit differently than the other animals on this list because there is a state law for the reptiles. And as I offered last time, USARK is here to help however possible, no matter what your actions are moving forward. And I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
That is the last individual to speak, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Javis, and thank you to those of you who showed up to speak today. We've been discussing this item for quite some time. We've had it in committee a few times. And at this point, I'd like to bring the item back to conversation for the council, to our committee, that is, and hear any kind of final thoughts y'all have. And ideally, we will be voting this out to send back to the full council one way or another. So I'll open it up to fellow council members to see what's on your mind. Councilmember Cops.
Just to be clear, when we're talking about this, we're talking about dangerous wild animals. We're not talking about things like frogs or garter snakes. Is that correct? Yeah,
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to bring up a few points. Some of these have been brought up before, I admit, and some have not been yet. I think as to the speakers, and I appreciate all of them speaking today and coming before us, all I think had relevant good points. I believe, and I did not get speaker number, I think it was 6, Lindsay. I did not get her last name, so I'm sorry. I'm not going by your last name. But I think her point about she's saying or stating that that the animal that she's talking about is considered domesticated. So I think that's something, we say any non-domesticated animal. So I think I guess if legal staff would look into if indeed that hybrid breed, what it is considered, and by, I don't know who would consider it one way or the other, by experts, whoever they are, zoos or museums or whoever might be experts on that. I think that's she might fit in within the exemption. I don't know. Other than that, other than Lindsay, there was no one else from the city that spoke in favor of not doing anything. Really, they spoke in favor of banning now, or at least in the future, or going forward. So just want to make that point. I have not had anybody, I have had auto-generated emails that we all get on in support of doing nothing, but I have not gotten any individualized emails, calls, texts from people that live not only in my district, but that supports doing nothing. I believe that option 2 is a compromise. I think as most of the folks that have dealt with this issue personally believe we need to ban animals that are now in people's homes. I do understand that the animal groups that support and represent these type of animals are okay with a compromise that just puts on a ban, option 2, which puts a ban going forward, a date certain, and then those that have these animals would not be affected other than they would have to register. I'm not sure registration is going to work either for option 2 or in option 3, but at least in option 2, we know there is a number of animals out there that it's not going to be going on forever. I think an option 3 would be a disaster. It would not do anything for us, and I don't believe people would come forward voluntarily at any point to do that. So I don't think that's a good argument. I do want to refer people to the Department of Insurance memo that was sent out to, I believe, all cities in the state, to their public safety coordinators from the emergency management director as well as our state fire marshal. I'll read you the first sentence. It's regarding local hazardous animal ordinances best practice. It was sent August 11, 2021, and I have a feeling it was sent in response to what's going on in Raleigh. It says exotic animals that are housed in residential occupancies can pose a threat to the safety of public safety personnel in any community. It is important for local jurisdictions to consider appropriate and actionable ordinances to protect fire law enforcement, and EMS personnel in situations where animals pose a physical threat. Examples of exotic animals that pose a public safety responder threat are venomous snakes, big cats, etc. Local jurisdictions are considered to do the following practices. Well, we have no practices. And so we don't even have anything to update because we have nothing in this arena. We're depending on, I guess some would say, state law, but we know there is really no state law directly impacting this. It's just impacting the actual handling of the animals, what you have them. So I think that Department of Insurance memo is very pertinent to this issue. I think there's a liability issue. They're basically implying that, if not stating directly, that there is a liability issue that people could bring. And I bet you a good lawyer could bring it now that we know that these animals, at least we know that venomous snakes have been out there, and it sounds like from some of the testimony that they may still be out there. So I think that is a very important issue for us to take into consideration. Just looking at my notes, we do have an exemption, right? If you're qualified, you can keep these animals, and we can go and have the attorney read that portion of the proposed ordinance that allows people that are qualified to keep these animals. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about unqualified, uneducated people that are uneducated in this arena that are keeping these animals. They can meet, if they want to meet the level of qualification, go do that. And then you can keep these animals. I think it's a very fair and appropriate level of qualification for people to be able to keep these animals, remembering they are dangerous, they're wild, they're not domesticated. They can kill those people and they can kill their neighbors. So I think very strongly, I am going to put forward at the appropriate time, Madam Chair, though with a reservation, because I really think we should do option one. Because of the animal groups are supporting option two, I'm going to put forward a motion to support option two at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Knight. Councilmember Cox?
Just one more clarification is how does this affect our museums and any zoos within the city limits?
Those are within the exemption.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Knight?
Madam Chair, one last thing to Mr. Goss's point. I think he has a good one. I think we need to make sure that we have the framing of the venomous snake issue correct, because they, you know, as we've heard before from the our state wildlife agency, all indigenous animals, wild animals, are already restricted from being owned, right? So that's why we reduced this list down to non-indigenous animals. And while I think he's correct in that, obviously some of those are indigenous, some of them are not. And I think the concern there is the ones that aren't caught by the state law, but also obviously the ones that aren't indigenous to North Carolina. So I think if the legal staff would just make sure we're catching that right on for the indigenous snakes issue. Thank you.
Councilmember Fort, any comments you want to share?
No, I've listened to the arguments and I've listened to the comments from the public through several of our meetings. Not quite convinced that option two is the right way to go. I'm still leaning towards option three with registration. And so that's kind of where I am right now. I think, folks, if they register and let folks know what they've got in their houses, I think that's the appropriate way to go at this point. So I'm still favoring option three.
Thank you. Councilmember Cox, anything further? Okay. I will say, Councilmember Knight, I agree with you on one thing, which is I think option 3, I don't know that I would go as far as saying option 3 might be a disaster, but I don't know that it will be super effective. And I'm not in favor of a ban in either option 1 or option 2. So that puts me back at option 4. And so I'm happy for you to make your motion going for option 2, but I think we're going to need a second motion here to see if we can get this out of committee. So Councilmember Knight, if you would like to make your motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I move for the committee to support option 2. Is that, Council, how should I put it?
You're talking to me. You said council. I was confused. Yes, that's the motion. That's to recommend option 2 to the city council.
That's put better. Thank you.
Do we have a second? Councilmember Cox, I'm assuming that means you have a question, not a second.
I question. Well, that statement really is that I have to say right at this time, I'm kind of persuaded both ways. So I would be happy with just, having this come out of committee with no recommendation. But I would lean, I'm torn between option 2 and option 3. And I think option 4 is not an option. Doing nothing is not an option. And but I would prefer just to have this referred out of committee with no recommendation, and then we continue the discussion at the council.
Thank you. I'm assuming that means we do not have a second for Councilmember Knight's motion. Pausing to make sure that that's correct. So that motion does not move forward, fails. I think we could have, Councilmember Cox, to your point, I think we could have 3 votes for option 3. But if you would like to make a motion to vote this out with no recommendation, I think we could have votes for that. So.
Okay. Well, I'll make a motion to vote this out with no recommendation and to have further discussion at the council table. So if there's no second to that.
Councilmember Knight.
I mean, only to get it out of here and put it into council, I will second that.
Okay. All right, there's been a motion and a second. All in favor? Opposed?
I'm only opposing because we didn't get a chance to vote on option 3.
Understood. All right, so this will be voted, or we just voted this out 3-1 with no recommendation back to the council. I'm sure Councilmember Knight will do his part. I will do my part to make sure we educate the rest of our council members so that they don't come into this conversation blind. There's been a lot of conversation that's happened here, and we will continue this at the full council table.
Chair, I'm wondering if we might describe to the number of listeners on the call how this will appear back on the council agenda. So I don't know if you want to do that. I'm happy to do that.
To go ahead. Yep.
Okay, so for those that are watching this issue on the next council meeting, which will be February 1st, this won't be identified as a specific agenda item. So at the end of the agenda, people will see a category that is says reports of council committees, and embedded in that will be the minutes and information from this meeting. So I didn't want anybody to go to the agenda for February 1st and not see a specific agenda item. So for those that are following the issue from their homes.
Thank you.
So just to be clear for the public, this will be on next Tuesday's city council meeting?
Under GNR report out.
And so at that point, the full council will take it up. Correct.
I would just add the full council can take it up or ask to bring it back later for a full presentation, like we've given to this committee, as opposed to doing that at the time of report out, but I'll defer to whatever y'all want to do on that.
Councilmember Knight.
So just to be clear again, so we would have to ask for a full presentation at a later meeting. It couldn't occur then, correct?
Tansy, you can chime in, but I mean, I think generally, do we do a full presentation on the, a proposed ordinance at the report out, or would we set that for a special item for later?
Yeah, I would presume, I mean, clearly, there's some ability to respond to the wishes of the council. Generally, I think if there was a more in-depth conversation than a transactional action on a committee report, I think generally that council will give direction to staff in terms of preparing for a future item. So I think we'll be prepared to take direction from the council, whether or not there's interest in continued discussion and what format that would take, whether that would be a work session, a special item, or the council might defer a discussion.
Councilmember Knight.
May I suggest or ask for clarification? What we would normally do is say by a 3-1 vote, the committee recommends that the item be removed from the agenda. And we would include the four or five options, whatever, as part of the minutes in the agenda packet. And then they decide, how to go from there. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's right. That's right, City Clerk. I think the more the discussion, the question is about how the council in the future would deliberate the four options, not so much. So yes, you're right in terms of what would be in the agenda itself. Thank you.
Councilmember Knight.
So just to forecast, I will recommend that the staff bring back the same presentation that we've heard to at a future council meeting. And I'll let the mayor decide how she wants to handle that when. But I will recommend so that the council can hear more of a full presentation, so we don't vote on it too quickly, or it's a complex issue and they need to hear a full presentation, I think. So I'll recommend that at the council meeting. That makes sense.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're moving on to our second item, Omnibus Text Change Program. I think we're hearing from City Planning on this.
Thank you, Chairman. Pat Young is going to do a brief introduction. I think he's not visible yet. There he is.
Thank you, Tansy, and thank you, Chair Stewart, and good afternoon, committee members. Pat Young with Planning and Development. So as you'll recall, this is our proposed omnibus text changes. These are areas of changes that in the administration of the UDO, we've identified areas where applicants are struggling or staff is struggling with lack of clarity or precision. Technical standards have changed, or minor policy changes consistent with UDO are warranted. So you're going to hear more about those in a moment from Keegan McDonald of our staff. We have done these with council before. I think 2019 or early 2020 was the last time, but we do want to do these on a regular basis every 6 to 12 months because these certainly do build up over time. The ordinance is over 10 years old now, and we want to keep up with the best practices. Because it's our first time, what we decided to do today in respect of your consideration of your time is provide an overview of the over 24 proposed changes. But we are here to answer any questions you have or go into any level of detail you feel is appropriate. The memorandum that accompanied this item goes into a lot of detail on each item. And so Mr. McDonald or myself or one of our other team members can provide additional context and background, but I'm going to turn it over now to Keegan to give a short presentation with an overview of the proposed changes. Thanks.
All right. Thanks very much, Pat. So give me one moment as I pull up the PowerPoint. And just want to clarify that you are able to see my presentation slide. Is that correct?
Yes, Keegan, thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. So as Pat said, this is the Omnibus Text Change Program. Just a little refresher, this item, or I should say the program generally, was authorized by the council in November of 2021. Shortly thereafter, we brought the first list of items, which are contained in your backup materials today. So it's the exact same list. That appeared as a special item before the council, and they directed and moved this item to this committee for further review and discussion. The Omnibus Text Change Program, as Pat mentioned, is designed to allow staff to propose minor corrections to the UDO that satisfy specific criteria, which I will recap in just a moment. Of course, authorization and approval rests with the City Council, and this committee venue is the opportunity to ask questions, for us to provide responses or feedback to any items that are contained in the list. Of course, our descriptions and proposed solutions are meant to be high level because oftentimes the detail is sort of worked out through the internal vetting and drafting process with staff. And the final ordinance will, of course, move through the text change process just as any other ordinance does if any one or all of these items is authorized. The selection criteria that we've established for omnibus items, there are 3 of them. The first being low effort, meaning does not require an omnibus item or proposed change does not require a significant amount of research, does not require amending large portions of the code. Typically, it can be a very precise or surgical change to, only a few lines of code that can accomplish the goal. Low impact, and that means low policy impact. So we are not looking to make any sweeping policy changes with these omnibus items. They generally fall in line with established practice or current policy guidance. Areas where there could be lack of clarity and providing, making a correction would be in line with established policy protocol. And last, high priority. So issues in the code that have come up repeatedly amongst reviewers or generate consistent questions where there's a lack of clarity or understanding, or where the language could be tightened up a little bit. And so all of these items meet one or more of these criteria. What we tried to do without going into each individual item is to summarize them and put them into a few buckets for easier understanding. So these are clarification, process, regulatory or regulations, and last, synchronization. So I'm going to provide an overview of what each of these means and then give some examples directly from the list, just to kind of frame this discussion a little bit better for the committee. So for clarification, we're talking about items or corrections that deal with better defining when or how the code applies. So there's instances, special cases that come up where the code as generally written is difficult to apply. It may require interpretation or extensive discussion. And there is a relatively simple fix that would make this clearer and help out our review staff and our external customers. Relatedly, refining imprecise language. Again, sometimes the code is written very generally and there needs to be specific language added that can apply to certain situations that might come up. And last, this is kind of a classic omnibus type item, are those that correct typos or organizational errors, which do exist, especially with the frequency at which we've been updating our code over the past several years. So some examples, just touch on these at a very high level. But for instance, neighborhood transitions and plan developments. So right now we have neighborhood transition requirements that apply between our mixed use and residential districts. However, the language does not account for plan developments, which have an underlying zoning classification. We think some language could be added to make it clear those neighborhood transitions still apply. Detached frontage parking limitations. Right now, the code could be interpreted such that it would prevent driveways along areas where the detached frontage is mapped, which is in our mixed-use districts. That is obviously not our intent. It's really just to limit parking itself. And so that's an area of clarification. And then also frontage streetscape requirements. This is really fits into that typo or organizational error section. We updated the streetscape sections of the code and did not update the cross-reference in the frontage sections of the code. So that's a relatively easy fix, but just makes it clearer to people reading that and making sure they're moving to the right section that's cross-referenced. For process, these are refinements or corrections to existing processes that we have, many of which are detailed in the code. Also modifications to how certain applications or permit types are managed. Some examples, final plat web notice. Right now, we still have a web notice requirement for non-subdivision final plat. It has been removed for our regular subdivision process. This is just a holdover in an area that we think the two could be easily synchronized. Waiver of city bond requirement. So Section 813 allows for a construction surety in the event development related improvements and installations are not completed prior to a request to record a subdivision or obtain a building permit. And at present, city projects are not exempt from this requirement, which could be interpreted as the city needing to provide surety to itself for its own projects. And so that's just a process we develop for external users that really might not be applicable to the city itself. And then approval of wall and fence materials. Right now, there's language in the code that allows the development services director to approve alternate materials. We want to remove this discretionary authority and make sure the code is objective and can be easily understood. It creates predictability for users. Within the regulatory realm, these are substantive, meaning they're policy shifts, but low impact changes to existing policy. And we wanted to make sure these were called out specifically because they do kind of require some policy guidance, but we think they're pretty minor, and we think the changes that we bring forth are going to fit within the broader framework of the UDO. And again, these solutions are guided by practicality and also professional judgment. So a few examples with the green frontage, which is one of our frontage designations. Right now, it requires a landscaping area at the front of the property, but there's no specifics given, even though plenty of other sections of the code specify very clearly what type of landscaping is required. This is an area where we could just provide that level of detail. Service access driveway spacing. In the downtown area especially, there are frequently constrained sites or small lots where they're building large projects that have service driveways for trash and delivery and regular driveways for users of the site. And our code today requires a minimum spacing that's often difficult to achieve and doesn't really gain anything from a safety perspective. And so that spacing standard could be amended specifically related to these service access driveways. Right-of-way encroachments, the code outlines specific allowances for encroachment into city right-of-way, but does not specify allowances for encroachment into state-owned right-of-way, also railroad right-of-way, which does exist in certain places. And we propose inserting that language so it's clear that if they obtain the appropriate approval with those bodies, that they could encroach into those rights-of-way. Last, synchronization. So aligning various sections of the code with each other and or state law and cross-referencing where sensible and applicable. So if you are familiar with our code, oftentimes there are a lot of cross-references, and that's because we don't want to be repetitive in each section, and it's meant to kind of work in sync, sort of like it's meant to sort of puzzle together. If you find a landscaping standard associated with a use, you're able to click and quickly reference that landscaping standard, which is contained in its own section of the code. So this is it comes up with our telecommunication towers. We allow setback relief for towers over 250 feet, but do not have that same allowance for them to be modified for towers under 250 feet. We really don't see a reason for there to be that disparity. And so we propose a synchronization there. With special care facilities, we require a minimum distance or minimum separation, between special care facilities. We believe this should be evaluated under state law and amended to be in line with those state law limitations and or requirements. In detached frontage, front yard setback, the detached frontage is designed for our mixed use districts to more closely resemble the look and appearance of residential districts. And so there's a specific methodology for where your building can be placed on a lot. We think that's an easy case where we could sync up this section of the code with our existing infill compatibility standards, which you may be familiar with. A simple cross-reference would assist a lot with how that methodology is administered. So next steps. The committee may choose to recommend authorization or denial of any item on this list. Alternatively, you may request additional information and or hold any of these items for further discussion. Once review is complete, staff will deliver a report to the council for final authorization of the text change. Again, I realize that there are a lot of items here. We wanted to offer you all the opportunity to ask us questions if you had any specific questions concerning these items. I did want to note there are a few items specifically related to urban forestry and also transportation. We have staff from both of those groups available if there are specific technical questions for them. Most of them are zoning related, so I hope between myself, Pat, and Justin that we could answer them if you do have any questions. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. It's a lot of information. Just to be sure, I wanted to ask Mr. Chavis if we have anybody signed up to speak to this item. Don't believe we do.
We do not have anyone here to speak to this item, ma'am.
Thank you. Council members, any questions? Councilmember Cox and then Councilmember Ford.
Yes, I have questions about several items. One in particular is item 31, which is the spacing for special care facilities. As I understand it, this would include group homes. And then, because I have issues with group homes, I mean, as I understand the history of this, the spacing requirement was for group homes so that we don't have a concentration of group homes in one area. And where a company comes in and buys a bunch of houses and then uses them for drug rehabilitation or for group homes for people that are out of jail recently, for example. And the idea being to provide some sort of a minimum spacing requirement between these. And so I think I would like to hold this certainly for more discussion, because at this point in time, without understanding this better, I would not be in support of that.
I wonder if staff has an immediate response to that, or does that need more?
I can chime in real quickly if Keegan can't. I think the idea is to make sure the UDO comports with state and federal law. And so it's not to change anything that we had any discretion to change, and that it would be something that we would be required to do by state and federal law. Keegan, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We weren't intending to change the policy in any way other than to align with state law. As currently worded, we think some of those spacing standards may not exactly comport as the city attorney has mentioned. And so really just making sure there's alignment there.
Well, the backup is pretty clear. It says, with guidance from the city attorney's office, this section should be updated to ensure compliance with federal and state law. Okay. Including the elimination of the spacing requirement. And that's key. That is key to how we are managing group homes in the city of Raleigh. I mean, maybe you're too young to realize that. I mean, because this was enacted numerous years ago. And, but I think this is something that needs to be investigated further before we act on it. So that was that one. I did note the changes to several items related to trees. And I think that is something that needs to be looked at more in depth. We've talked about having citywide tree ordinance in the past. And so I think before we make any changes there, we should take a look at that and see what the ramifications are. Item 29, just some clarification on that. Currently, the table states that RHDC has review and recommendation authority over all rezoning map amendment / TCZs, as well as preliminary subdivision plans. But is that everywhere in the city, or is that only within historic overlay districts?
I will just make a quick comment and then I'll defer to the city attorney's office because I know they're working on this section as well. I just will note that the summary review authority table, I think, doesn't provide the necessary clarity if it does apply only to those specific areas of the city or if it applies to all rezonings and TCZs. So with that being said, I'm just going to defer to Robin to provide a little bit more information.
Yes, we actually had asked that this wait and be pulled off this list, but my very capable senior associate David York had unexpected surgery last week, and so it kind of got stuck here when it shouldn't have been. We are in the process of revising all of the RHDC Historic Overlay District provisions to align with 160D. They don't do that right now, and we believe that any review of any rezonings or anything that is in a historic district that is sent to the RHDC for review needs to align with state law, and just moving something in the chart doesn't necessarily get it there. So we want to give that some more thought and review before it comes back.
Okay. I am scrolling through this very long document. So the specific items for for trees are items 16, 17, and 18. So those are the ones that I think warrant more discussion. And 15. Townhouse driveways. I mean, here we're proposing that up to 50% of the front of a building for townhouses could be essentially concrete. And I guess our current standard is 40%. So I'm trying to understand, why do we want to go to 50%? To accommodate bigger cars, more cars? I mean, especially when we're trying to minimize automobile usage, especially with townhouses.
Yeah, I understand. And Bradley Kimbrell with Transportation is on the line, so I'll let him comment as well. I just want to note that we used to permit up to 50%, and a recent change to another section of the code inadvertently removed that allowance for townhouses specifically. Many townhouse developments, as you probably are aware, are front-loaded, meaning they take access from the street. And just given the townhouse building format, they have limited space by which to provide a driveway and access to a garage, which is pretty commonplace. And we've seen some or a number of projects come forth where they feel they're unable to build that product to the specifications or desires of their client and still meeting that 40% driveway area limitation just because of how narrow the lots are. And so this was sort of recognizing that the code used to provide this allowance specifically for townhouse lots and inserting that back in.
Okay, because some townhouses can actually be quite large, and they can have significant frontage. And so if we're going to say 50%, I think it should be 50%, or maybe we should specify a width of a driveway to accommodate the width of 2 cars. Okay, so either 50% or that width, whichever is less.
Understood.
Okay, so that was item 14. And I just scroll through here, see what else there is. I was wondering if you could explain item 9 a little bit more about the street protective yard applicability. I didn't really understand that one too well. Because it says that, require a street protective yard only when the subject property is across the street from a district other than heavy industrial. And so what happens with heavy industrial? Is there no protective yard if it's heavy industrial?
Yeah, so I think the issue here is that there's just an issue with how this is organized in the code, such that right now there's a requirement in that section that doesn't necessarily align, and I believe 441, that doesn't align with other requirements in chapter 6. So it's just a misalignment of the standard. It's not a,
Well, I'd like to get some clarification on whether or not there is a protective yard for heavy industrial for IH. And is this proposed change going to eliminate that protective yard for IH? Because it's not clear to me based on what I'm reading here.
Councilmember Cox, what the issue with this item is that there's two conflicting provisions in the code. One
I can't hear
requires,
you. Sorry, I can't hear you.
is that any better?
A little bit.
All right. There's a conflicting provision in the code where one section says that the protective yard is required all the time. There's another provision in the code that says it's only required when across only if it's across the street from a district that isn't heavy industrial. So the goal here would be to align those two sections, and we could either require the protective yard in all instances, or only when there is not a heavy industrial use across the street.
Well, I guess I would support the former, where it's required in all cases. I mean, others in the committee may feel differently, but that's my opinion. Okay, and then item 8, infill compatibility. It talks about including a cross-reference to section 156C3, but we don't have the text of that section, so I don't really know exactly what that says and how it would apply.
yeah, certainly. So essentially, when we redid the build to section of the code, we made allowances for setbacks to be altered if there was some type of impediment present. So think an easement, for instance. And we, with the help of our plan review staff, developed very specific criteria when a setback could be adjusted to account for that impediment. And we only included that in the build to section of the code, which kind of applies more generally across the city. However, it's not contained in the NCOD section of the code. And so as those rules are applied, they don't allow for that level of flexibility and can't account for impediments where they otherwise can't build, which has necessitated some folks coming forth for variances to those NCOD setback regulations.
Okay. I mean, that might be reasonable, it might not, but I'd like to see those details and get some examples of where this could present a problem for the NCODs.
Understood.
I mean, I understand what you're saying is that without this change, there could be conditions or situations where someone couldn't build something. But in an NCOD, that might not necessarily be a bad thing. And so I'd like to get some examples of where that would happen, where it would be considered a bad thing. So that's item 8, and so those are. And then item 7 regarding the telecommunication tower setbacks and providing, these options for changing the setbacks for towers under 250 feet. Yeah, I guess that's okay, but I obviously am interested in hearing from the public about, their perspective on this, and then oh yeah, and then regarding item 6, final plat web notice. What's the difference between a regular final plat and a non-subdivision final plat?
I'm going to defer to Justin just because of his work in the plan review realm. He probably could give a more succinct answer than I could.
I hope you can hear me okay. A subdivision plat would be the plat that records when new lots are being created. So if you're taking one lot and creating 4 lots, 2, 3, 4, 200 lots, that's a subdivision plat. A non-subdivision plat are maps that are recorded to maybe shift properties between neighbors. Maybe one neighbor is selling a sliver of their land to another neighbor. or recombining two existing lots into one lot. Other examples would be to record things like when property lines aren't being changed, but things are being recorded, such as drainage easements, utility easements.
Okay.
Just flats where new lots are not being created. Let's say that the Wake County Register of Deeds does house all these recorder maps, and they are searchable and viewable. What this would do is just not require the city to post redundant copies of those on.
Well, okay. Thank you. Okay, that's it for my comments.
And
Madam Chair.
Councilmember Cox, I just wanted to let you know I did receive a comment from our transportation staff specific to that driveway width question you had for townhouses, just to provide a little bit more detail. Currently, the code requires a minimum 10-foot driveway width to access those driveways. And we frequently have townhouse lots that are less than 22 feet wide. So putting together that minimum 10 foot against a 22-foot wide lot is why you encounter those issues. But I want to take your point about providing, it could be a percentage or a minimum or maximum driveway width, whichever happens to work in that specific situation.
Right, right. Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Chair, it's Pat Young. If it would please the committee, we certainly could come back at the next meeting of this group with additional examples and details on the items that Councilmember Cox flagged. Keegan has a list that he can maybe quickly review to make sure we caught them all. I think we believe those all could proceed forward, but additional information is clearly needed. I will mention on the tree related ones that Councilmember Cox mentioned. We are going to be bringing you some larger, more comprehensive recommendations on tree conservation and replacement requirements at your February 8th work session. So we could potentially incorporate those into that work. So I'll work with staff about how we want to route those, but in any case, we'll provide additional information before they proceed forward.
Thank you, Mr. Young, and thank you, Mr. Cox. I know Councilmember Cox, you spent a lot of time looking at the backup. I do want to remind Council, I know Councilmember Fort, you had your hand up next, but I do want to remind us all that we are kind of taking this item out of order. And so whenever we do send forth the omnibus text change, it will go to the Planning Commission for their review, for public comment, and then come back. So there will be moments of time for public comment if folks don't end up coming to GNR when we're discussing this item. Councilmember Fort.
Well, you and Councilmember Cox have already addressed my questions. My first questions were about the issues with trees. I know I've had several meetings with folks around the city about this issue. And so I guess we'll hear more on February 8th, and then you addressed my issue. I guess my question was, when would the public have an opportunity to weigh in? But since this goes to the Planning Commission and all of that, so those were my two questions. So y'all have already covered ground for me.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Knight, did you have any questions or comments?
Good with the process, thank you. I appreciate them coming forward, and I like the way that this process works. It's a good way to do it, to update our ordinance. Thank you.
Great. I'll add, when I was reviewing the 4 items on trees, it looked like it would actually be helping us and getting us towards some of this citywide tree conservation protections and allowing more. One of the things that Councilmember Knight and I've been hearing is allowing more saplings to be planted instead of requiring older trees to be replanted, which have a less likelihood of being kept alive and are more costly to plant, but to allow saplings in addition to those. So I'm happy to get further information on that, as well as the other items that Councilmember Cox listed. Maybe Mr. McDonald, if you want to make sure that you have captured the ones we'll hear more in depth on at our next GNR meeting, so that we're all on the same page, that would be great.
Yeah, certainly. So let me go through, and please feel free to stop me if I miss any, or if there's additional comments you want to make. I'll just run through the the numbers and titles of each. First, I have item number 6, final plat web notice. I know that question was answered, but we're happy to bring back any additional information to provide a definition for each or a more comprehensive definition of each. Item 7, telecommunication tower setback standards. Item 8, NCOD and residential infill compatibility, primary street setbacks. Item 9, street protective yard applicability. Item 14, townhouse driveways. And then items 15 through 18, which are all tree related. And item 29, which is summary of review authority for the RHDC. And last, item 31, special care facilities.
I'm seeing a head nod from Councilmember Cox, so I
Yes,
think we got them all.
that's my list.
Great. And just in case we can pull this one early, it sounds like from the attorney's office that maybe item number 29 isn't right to move forward.
Right.
That's correct.
Okay, so we would likely move that one off if we can just kind of make a note for us when we come back next time. Any other questions from council members or thoughts? Okay, and then looking to our deputy city clerk, do you have what we need to keep this item in committee, or do we need a motion to keep it in committee?
No motions necessary, really, just a lean in committee.
Great. So we will leave this item in committee and get a fuller report on the items that Mr. McDonald reviewed, and we'll go from there at our next committee meeting in February. Great, and with that, unless there's anything else from anybody, all right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.